The city was a living, breathing creature made of steel and light, a place where a million stories collided every second. In a quiet corner, tucked away from the main roar of the traffic, was a little cafe called the Gilded Cup. It was here, on a Tuesday afternoon, that two very different worlds were about to bump into each other in a way that would change everything. Ogechi pushed open the heavy door of the cafe, a gentle chime announcing her arrival. She was a sculptor, an artist whose hands were more used to the rough, gritty feel of clay and cold stone than the smooth surface of a phone. She had moved to this vast city only a few months ago, a brave decision to chase the dream that burned brightly inside her. Her studio apartment was small and always dusted with a fine layer of clay, so the cafe had become her sanctuary, a place to think and to sketch her grand ideas for new statues. Today, her large bag was slung over her shoulder, heavy with her sketchbook and the quiet loneliness that sometimes follows a person in a new place. She scanned the room for her usual spot, the small table by the window that caught the afternoon sun. But today, it was occupied. In fact, every single table was occupied except for one. Her eyes traveled to the far back corner, to a large circular table made of dark wood. And at that table sat a man. He was not like the other customers who chatted or stared at their laptops. He sat perfectly still, a cup of black coffee steaming, untouched, in front of him. He was reading a newspaper, but he didn't seem to be reading it for fun. His posture was straight and powerful, and he wore a sleek black suit that looked very expensive. He had sharp, handsome features and dark hair that was styled perfectly. But the most striking thing about him was the space around him. It wasn't just that the other chairs at his table were empty. It was that the tables nearest to him were also empty. People gave his space a wide berth, sneaking glances at him when they thought he wasn't looking, their whispers hushed and careful. He was an island of silence in the noisy cafe, and everyone else was a boat afraid to come ashore. Ogechi felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She didn't know who he was, but she could feel the unspoken rule in the air. Do not disturb that man. She bit her lip, considering her options. She could leave and come back another time, but she had been looking forward to this quiet moment all day, a break from the loud city and the silent studio. She took a deep breath, feeling a stubbornness rise within her. It was just a chair. What was the worst that could happen? With a confidence she didn't entirely feel, she walked across the cafe. Her footsteps seemed too loud on the wooden floor. She stopped right in front of his table, the empty chair seeming to taunt her. The man did not look up. He slowly turned a page of his newspaper, the sound crisp in the quiet bubble around them. "Excuse me?" Ogechi said, her voice clear and melodic. The man's movements stilled. Very slowly he lowered his newspaper. His eyes, dark and intense, lifted to meet hers. For a moment, Ogechi felt like a tiny bug under a magnifying glass. His gaze was heavy, taking in every detail of her face. He didn't speak, simply waited. "Can I sit here?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair. "Everywhere else is full." The air grew even thicker. A few people at nearby tables had stopped pretending not to watch. They were openly staring, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and curiosity. The man named Shung Ho studied her. He was the leader of a very powerful, secret organization. People did not approach him. They did not make small talk with him. They certainly did not ask to share his table. His first instinct was to give a single, sharp shake of his head, a look that would send anyone else scurrying away in fear. But something about this woman stopped him. She wasn't trembling. Her eyes, a warm, deep brown, held his gaze without flinching. She had a boldness he rarely encountered. A long, silent moment passed. Then, his lips, which were usually set in a firm, serious line, parted. His voice was low and smooth, like dark velvet, but his words carried a weight that made her heart skip a beat. "Sit," he said. The single word was a command. He paused, letting it hang in the air between them. "But don't think you're leaving after." Ogechi's breath caught in her throat. It was a strange and slightly scary thing to say. Was it a threat? A joke? She couldn't tell. But something in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't anger but curiosity, made her decide to stay. She gave a small, brave nod. "Okay," she said simply. She slid into the chair, placing her heavy bag on the floor. She could feel the eyes of the entire cafe on her, but she refused to look at them. She focused on unpacking her sketchbook and a pencil case. Seung-ho watched her, his newspaper now forgotten on the table. He was fascinated by the simple, ordinary things she was doing. He saw the smudge of clay on her sleeve and the slight calluses on her fingers. These were marks of a life of creating, a life completely foreign to his own life, of giving orders and making threats. Ogechi opened her sketchbook to a blank page and began to draw. She was sketching the idea for a new sculpture, two figures intertwined. As her hand moved across the paper, Seung-ho found he couldn't look away. Her movements were graceful and sure. There was a peacefulness about her, a calm focus that was the exact opposite of the tense, dangerous world he lived in every day. He usually came to this cafe to be alone, to think about business, to be surrounded by a silence that everyone else was too afraid to break. But today her presence was not an intrusion. It was interesting. He didn't say another word. He just sat and watched her draw, the steam from his coffee finally fading. Ogechi, for her part, was intensely aware of his gaze. It was like a physical warmth on the side of her face. She tried to concentrate on her lines and curves, but her mind was racing. Who was this man? Why did he say she couldn't leave? The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had become a strange, quiet conversation all its own. After what felt like both a minute and an hour, Ogechi closed her sketchbook. She had finished her drawing. She packed her things slowly, giving him a chance to speak, to repeat his strange warning, but he remained silent, just watching her. She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She looked at him one more time. "Thank you for the chair," she said softly. Seung-ho gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't smile, but the hard look in his eyes had softened just a little. He watched her walk away, the gentle chime of the door signaling her exit. The cafe slowly returned to its normal noise level, but Seung-ho's quiet corner felt different. It felt emptier than it ever had before. He looked down at his cold, forgotten coffee. He had told her she couldn't leave, but he had let her go. And as he sat there in the sudden, crushing silence, he realized with a jolt that he desperately wanted to see the woman with the clay-stained hands again. The empty chair across from him was now a question, and he was determined to find the answer. The following day arrived, painted in the same soft afternoon light as the one before. Inside the gilded cup, the usual hum of conversation and clinking cups seemed to hold its breath. Seung-ho was already at his table, the dark wood surface bare except for a single fresh cup of coffee. He had arrived earlier than usual, a subtle shift in a routine that was normally as rigid and unchangeable as stone. He did not read a newspaper. He did not look at his phone. He simply sat, his posture as impeccable as ever, but his attention was fixed on the cafe's entrance, his dark eyes watching the door with an intensity that was usually reserved for high-stakes business meetings. The other patrons, sensing this shift, were even more careful to avoid his space, casting nervous glances his way, wondering what or who the powerful man was waiting for. Ogechi almost didn't go. The memory of Seung-ho's low voice and his cryptic words had replayed in her mind all night. "But don't think you're leaving after." It was a statement that could be a threat, a promise, or something else entirely. A sensible voice in her head told her to find a new cafe, to avoid the complication, the undeniable danger that clung to him like a shadow. But a stronger, more curious part of her, the same part that could look at a block of raw stone and see the beautiful form hidden within, wanted to understand what lay beneath his cold exterior. So, she found herself pushing open the heavy door, the chime sounding louder to her ears this time. He saw her the moment she entered. A flicker of something, relief, satisfaction, passed through his eyes so quickly it was almost missed. He watched her hesitate just inside the doorway, her own eyes scanning the room. Today, there were other empty tables, but her gaze drifted past them, landing on him. She took a deep, steadying breath and walked toward his corner, her steps more confident than the day before. "Is this seat still taken?" she asked, a small, tentative smile touching her lips. Seung-ho gestured to the empty chair. "It is yours," he said, his voice still a low rumble, but the edge of command was softened, replaced by a simple statement of fact. She sat, and the strange, silent dance began again. She pulled out her sketchbook. He watched her hands, but today, the silence felt different. It was a bridge being built, piece by piece, rather than a wall between them. After a long while, as Ogechi shaded a part of her drawing, she spoke without looking up. "My name is Ogechi. I'm a sculptor." It was a simple offering, a piece of herself laid gently on the table between them. Seung-ho was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. He looked at her hands, at the smudges of dried clay under her fingernails, evidence of her truth. "I am Seung-ho," he finally said. He did not offer what he did. The weight of his name in this city was often enough, but for her, it was just a name. She simply nodded, storing it away, and continued drawing. The next day, she came again, and the day after that. It became their new, unspoken routine. Slowly, carefully, words began to fill the silence. Ogechi would talk about her work, her voice growing animated as she described the feeling of releasing a shape from a block of marble, the frustration of a piece of clay that wouldn't obey, her dream of one day having her own gallery show. She spoke of the warmth and vibrant colors of her home in Nigeria, a world away from the cool, sleek grays of this city. Seung-ho listened. It was a skill he had in abundance, but he usually listened for lies, for weakness, for leverage. Listening to Ogechi was different. He listened to the passion in her voice, the light in her eyes when she spoke about her art. He found himself offering small pieces of his own world in return. He didn't speak of violence or power. He spoke of the heavy burden of leadership, of the loneliness that came with a position where trust was a luxury he could not afford. He told her about the constant pressure, the feeling of being constantly watched and never truly seen. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after their first meeting, he watched her sketch a garden, a fantastical place with twisting vines and flowing fountains that existed only in her imagination. He studied the drawing for a long moment. "I have a garden," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It is private. No one else goes there." He paused, an internal battle clear on his face. "Would you like to see it?" The invitation was monumental. It was an invitation into his sanctuary, a breach in the high walls he had built around his life. Ogechi felt the significance of it. She nodded. "I would like that very much." His car was a silent black vehicle that seemed to absorb the light around it. The drive was quiet, taking them away from the city center and up into the wooded hills that overlooked the sprawling metropolis. They arrived at a high, unadorned wall with a heavy wrought iron gate that swung open silently. The moment they stepped through, the world changed. The noise of the city vanished, replaced by the gentle whisper of leaves and the trickle of water. It was a Korean garden, meticulously designed with ancient, twisting pine trees, a calm, reflective pond covered in lily pads, and a winding path of smooth, gray stepping stones. It was a place of profound peace, a secret heart hidden away from the world. "It's beautiful," Ogechi breathed, her artist's eyes taking in the composition of nature, the balance and harmony. "It feels like a piece of another time." "It is the only place where I can think," Seung-ho said, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since she had met him. The powerful, intimidating boss was gone. replaced by a man simply standing in his garden. Inspired, Ogechi asked if she could bring some clay and work there. He agreed, and so their afternoons moved from the public cafe to his private garden. She would sculpt, her fingers shaping the wet, pliable earth, while he would sit nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching her, the tension slowly draining from his body. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They shared stories from their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. The space between them on the stone bench grew smaller. The intimacy grew, a slow, steady burn. A casual brush of her hand against his as she passed him a tool, his fingers gently wiping a stray smudge of clay from her cheek. Their eyes would meet and hold, the unspoken words hanging heavy and sweet in the air between them. The garden, once a place of solitary peace, was now filled with the soft sound of her laughter and the quiet rhythm of her breathing. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ogechi was putting her tools away. Sung-ho stood by the pond, watching the colors reflect on the water's surface. She walked over to him, coming to stand by his side. The world was hushed, holding its breath. "Ogechi," he said, her name a soft prayer on his lips. She turned to look at him. In the golden twilight, the sharp lines of his face were softened. He was no longer the Mafia boss or the lonely man in the cafe. He was just Seung-ho, looking at her with a raw, open vulnerability that made her heart ache. He lifted a hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so tender it stole her breath away. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She rose onto her toes to meet him. Their first kiss was not a clash of passion, but a slow, gentle discovery. It was soft and searching, a silent promise whispered from his lips to hers. It was a kiss that held all the loneliness of their pasts and all the hope for their future. When they finally parted, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by the secret garden, they both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The peace of the secret garden could not last forever, for Sung-ho's world was one of shadows and sharp edges, and it would not simply let him go. The change in him had not gone unnoticed. His men saw the new softness in his eyes, the way he would sometimes be distracted, a faint, unfamiliar smile touching his lips. An enemy, a man named Jun-ho who had long desired Sung-ho's power, saw this not as a change of heart, but as a critical weakness, and he knew exactly where to strike. The news came to Sung-ho not as a shout, but as a cold, quiet report. Jun-ho had discovered Ogechi. He knew she was a sculptor. He knew about her upcoming art show, the most important moment of her professional life, where she would unveil her newest collection. Jun-ho's plan was not to use fists or guns, but to destroy her dream, to crush her spirit, and in doing so, break the new, fragile happiness that made Sung-ho vulnerable. When Sung-ho told Ogechi, his voice was heavy with a guilt that weighed him down. He expected fear, or worse, anger. He expected her to see the danger he had brought into her life and to run from it, from him. But Ogechi listened, her face growing serious, but her eyes never losing their warm light. She reached out and took his hand, her sculptor's fingers, strong and sure, intertwining with his. "He thinks my dream is a weakness," she said, her voice steady. "But he is wrong. It is my strength, and he thinks your love for me is a weakness. But he is wrong about that too." In that moment, Sung-ho saw not just the artist, but the formidable woman whose will could shape stone. They would face this together. The night of the art show arrived. The gallery was filled with the city's elite, the air buzzing with conversation and the clinking of glasses. Ogechi's smaller sculptures were displayed around the room, beautiful pieces that drew murmurs of admiration. But the center of the room was occupied by a large form hidden under a deep, purple cloth. This was her masterpiece, the piece she called My Forever. Seung-ho stood in the shadows, dressed in a formal suit, his presence a silent, protective force. He was not there as a mafia boss, but as a man in love, his heart pounding with a nervous pride he had never felt before. Junho arrived with his own small, smug entourage. He moved through the crowd, offering false compliments, his eyes scanning for an opportunity to cause a scene, to humiliate Ogechi and prove Seung-ho powerless to protect what he loved. He stopped in front of a delicate clay sculpture of two birds in flight. "Charming," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the polite chatter. "But it seems a bit fragile. One wrong move and it could all crumble to dust." He reached out a finger as if to test its stability, a malicious smile on his face. This was the moment he had planned. But before his finger could touch the art, Seung-ho stepped from the shadows. He did not step with aggression or violence. He moved with a calm, absolute authority that made the room fall silent. "I would not do that," Seung-ho said, his voice low but carrying to every corner. "This is a place of creation, not destruction." Junho sneered, ready to unleash his verbal attack. But Seung-ho continued, speaking not to Junho, but to the gathered crowd. "For too long my world has been one of taking, of breaking. But this artist," he said, his gaze finding Ogechi's across the room, filled with a profound love, "has shown me how to build, how to create something that lasts." He then turned his attention back to Junho, and he did not threaten him. Instead, he revealed that he had used his resources not for revenge, but for justice. He had uncovered Junho's own secret financial crimes, his betrayals of their world's few honorable codes. He presented not a threat, but a choice. Leave now and face the consequences of his own actions, or be exposed to everyone. Junho's face drained of color. He had come to break a dream, and instead found himself outmaneuvered and defeated. Not by force, but by a smarter, better man. He slunk away, his power and his pride shattered. A hush fell over the gallery. All eyes were on Ogechi. She walked to the center of the room, to the large cloaked sculpture. She looked at Seung-ho, a silent thank you passing between them, and then she turned to the crowd. "This piece," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is about finding something permanent in a world that feels temporary. It is about two different strengths coming together to form one unbreakable whole." With a graceful pull, she drew away the purple cloth. A collective gasp rippled through the room. There, carved from a single, magnificent block of white marble, were two hands. One was clearly a man's hand, strong, with powerful fingers and visible tendons, representing a life of action and strength. The other was a woman's hand, graceful and elegant, yet with a surety in its pose that spoke of its own unique power. The two hands were not just touching, they were intertwined, their fingers laced together in a way that was both tender and unyielding. The marble was so expertly carved it looked like warm skin, and the way the hands held each other suggested not just love, but partnership, mutual support, and an unshakable promise. At the base of the sculpture was its title, etched into the stone, "My Forever." Seung-ho walked through the silent, awestruck crowd until he stood before the sculpture, before Ogechi. He looked at the marble hands, a perfect representation of their souls, and then into her eyes. The last of his walls, the final shields around his heart, crumbled to dust. He took both of her hands in his. "Ogechi," he began, his voice thick with emotion, heard by everyone. "My life was a cold, hard stone. I thought that was its only shape. You saw the beauty trapped inside. You saw the heart. You are my artist, my peace, my forever." He didn't need to get down on one knee. The promise in his words was more powerful than any ring. "Will you build a life with me? A quiet life, a peaceful life. Our life?" Tears of happiness streamed down Ogechi's face as she smiled, a brilliant, joyful smile that lit up the entire room. "Yes," she said, her voice a firm happy whisper that was also a vow. Yes, Seung-ho, forever. The gallery erupted in applause, but for them, the sound was distant. They were lost in each other, in the future they had just chosen. The story of the lonely artist and the mafia boss was over. In its place began the story of Ogechi and Seung-ho, two people who had carved a forever love from the hardest of beginnings. Their love story was now complete, a masterpiece they would cherish for the rest of their lives. If you were moved by the journey of Ogechi and Seung-ho and wish to join us for more unique tales of love that triumphs against all odds, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to craft and share these beautiful stories with you.